Mm, nothing healthy.
Okay. We might go to 2:30 if that's all right with you, bro.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
My boss always does things on the dot, so if she says 3 o'clock, it might be 5 minutes past, but it's always going to be around three.
Yeah.
So, mm.
You are listening to Alternating Sloth Podcast, episode 12. I have special guest Eric on again. Eric, how are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm not sure if we could be calling me a special guest anymore. I'm coming on quite often now.
Yeah. I'm
But
thinking of
I'm still glad to be
renaming
here.
maybe this a little bit, just because we do so many of these. Alternating Sloth Podcast, though, the whole purpose is really just to be something I can just do whenever that's different from Insert Cast, which is mostly interviews. And I'm, of course, not interviewing Eric here, we're just chatting and reviewing stuff. So,
Oh, definitely.
yeah. Which, by the way, just want to remind people who listen, there is a YouTube channel for... I haven't posted videos yet for some of the episodes that Eric has been on, but they'll be up soon. There has been, though, some other content up there. Some of the previous episodes of Insert Cast are now up there that you can listen to. It's just the icon mostly, but if you want to also listen to it on YouTube, it's there. I also sometimes post some videos of me doing some music and other stuff like that on there. So, yeah, you can check out the Insert Cast podcast YouTube channel for stuff like that. So, Eric, what have you been watching, playing? What have you been up to?
Honestly, doing whatever I can while I'm stuck here. Mostly, I've just been looking at random things, but lately I have delved into a bit of the music genre in terms of manga and anime. Mostly, I did find a couple of mangas and one anime to look at for. Yeah, just have a look at, really. The anime, well, it might be actually already well known to quite a few people, is Detroit Metal City.
So before we get into
Yeah.
that, so this week I gave Eric an assignment. I got him to. Usually I pick I get Eric to pick one manga that I will read, and I usually pick a manga that he'll read, and then I'll pick something that we watch. This week I let Eric pick both of the things we read, and I picked the thing that we watched. So yeah, you'll get to hear about that. But what games have you been playing, Eric?
One particular game would be Metro 2033, which is a game based off a book novel about a futuristic Russia, post-apocalyptic Russia. So think Stalker, but a bit more claustrophobic. Still a lot of fun though.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually enjoyed playing that. Although one thing I have to say, it might be me personally, but the stealthiness in the game almost non-existent. But maybe it's just because I suck at stealth. In any case, I still enjoy playing it because it's a really good horror game. Anyone looking to have a go at it can. There's 3 games in the series, and so. Yeah, there's 3 games in the series and the whole book around it. So if anyone is ever interested, can go and have a look at it. And no, you don't need to learn Russian to get interested. It's still interesting on its own.
Does it help though?
It doesn't make no difference. Thankfully.
So Eric, I was gonna ask. We reviewed some stuff last week. Have you been keeping up with any of that, or
absolutely not? Absolutely not. I've mostly been looking at being focused on the assignment, obviously, as I should be.
I did hear though
And
you did tell me, I think maybe a couple of days ago, that you did read a bit more of Saboteur Ichi.
oh, definitely, that was that's still fantastic. Still a good murder mystery series, and still really enjoyed reading it. There's as far as I remember looking at it, there's no real development to the overall story. It's still kind of episodic, like every other criminal series. There's no there is some development in terms of the personal character, but otherwise each chapter is a different story, different mystery, different person getting murdered, but it's still really enjoyable. It's still really enjoyable. I think one of the latest chapters was mysterious disappearances and murders of some girls, but it did show the main character having a clash with another local, I guess, detective in their case. But it was still a really good chapter. Might have developed the main character a little bit, but yeah. Otherwise, that's pretty much what I can remember so far. The chapters.
And what have your thoughts been, just from your first take of reading it to now? What have been some of the differences you've noticed reading it more and more? What's changing as you read it?
Honestly, not much, but I am a sucker for these kinds of things, really. So I do. I guess when it comes to these things, I kind of focus less on the character development and more on the I guess more on the each individual mystery, because the fun part of it is trying to solve it yourself, with all the clues that are gathering. It is a bit annoying when you realize the main character might, the author might not include things in there because they know them, but they still make it seem like the main character knows it, and at the end of it, it's like all these new clues popped up that you never knew about, and it kind of threw everything off, and you realize, should have really figured that out. But in I mean, in the case of kind of reading some of the character development, there's definitely some development to the relationship between the American character and this caregiver for the blind monk. And no, not the blind monk, sorry, the blind masseur. And the blind masseur, still a badass. Nothing's changed about that. It's something I enjoy seeing. Keep to a good character and almost stick with it, which is something I enjoyed. The fact that there's a great character already created, and nothing else needed much developing, because the character's already enjoyable right there and then.
So I've been since we got a bit of time, I've been mostly reading a bit of One Piece again. I've been catching up with that again, and I also went back and watched some of the anime, and I did a massive binge because I've skipped around a lot of the anime. I mostly just read some of the earlier chapters of the manga, and then sort of went further in, and I've sort of close to the latest arc. I kind of lost it a little bit in the Big Mom section for people who've been reading One Piece. But I've recently, the part of the anime that I just hadn't watched was the Fishman Island section. So I've been watching that, and that's been, it's really interesting, but pacing wise, it's not great. There's a lot of pacing issues where it's like, you could maybe do this arc and this part of the character, but earlier on or later on, there's a lot of time where it's like, why are they talking and why are they doing a whole backstory segment here when they should be going and fighting such and such? Especially when in other arcs they usually put the backstory in a different place, or they do it when there's no fighting going on, or they do it in like a moment where there's a bit of pause. And it also doesn't make sense for the villains to just be standing around not doing anything while all the other characters have got to tell their backstories and do their other things in a completely different location. So
Yeah, I think you've just kind of named the every single trope used in this kind of scenario,
It's
which
not that
includes,
common though
yeah,
in every part of One Piece though. There's some good pacing and some
yeah,
of the other arcs. It's just Fishman Island for some reason has some really bad placement issues with its with some of its story arcs, which is a shame because there are some good parts in there. There are some parts where it's just like feel the racism in your face, like this is the message. Do you get that
yeah,
this is the message? And it's like, Oda, I get this is the message already. You've told me
mm,
like subtly. You've told me it this way.
yeah,
I don't need you to
yeah.
push it, and I don't need you to directly say this person hates this person multiple times for me to get it. You know?
It is a bit of it was a bit over the top, I thought, as
Yeah.
well, considering that not really the push factor to your face in that scenario, but the fact that it was already explained like
Yeah.
700 chapters ago.
Yeah.
When we first encountered the fishmen, as a species in the One Piece world, we also were introduced to the kind of differences and
Yeah.
the sort of
And their feelings,
racism that exists. Yeah.
and we do get a bit more in depth on where that comes from. And that's interesting. That's good. What I didn't need was the Princess Otahime stuff and some of the other stuff that comes in. It's just a bit too much and a bit too over the top, and then a bit too melodramatic, and then it's like I don't care after a while.
It was a bit over the
And
top.
Hody
And
Jones sounds really cool and looks cool, but his backstory and his characterization is kind of lame, especially since he's just like, he's kind of, I don't know, he's not, he doesn't seem as well-rounded as some of the other characters, or some of
mm,
the other
he did
villains.
he did have that over the top kind of how do I say, that kind of over the top goal,
Mm,
I guess, to wipe out humanity or non-fishmen as a way to bring the fishermen up to the top, which we've seen already in real world
I think you
scenarios.
can have
But
a
yeah,
bombastic villain. I
yeah,
just think you need to maybe make him a bit more well-rounded. You can have him be nice, or you could just have him do some more. I think
mm,
it would help if One Piece let more characters die as well sometimes in the arcs, instead of someone gets mortally wounded and then they're fine the next couple chapters
damn
or
it, Connor,
so.
was Portugal's D ace not enough for you?
Hey,
Nah,
some people haven't read One Piece that are probably listening to
oops.
this. We're just
um,
casually talking about this, Eric. It's not a review. Don't chuck
no,
big spoilers in unless you're gonna put a spoiler tag. So
eh,
yeah, I did a big binge of that. I've been watching some other stuff, but let's get into the anime review. Eric, I'll let you, even though I chose it, I'll let you tell us about what I got us to watch.
Okay, so we got to watch. I got to watch Detroit Metal City, which is, as the title clues in, an anime about metal. As a music genre. Going into watch it, the opening, the anime opening itself it was pretty generic to what I can sum up
Oh,
in terms
did
of
you not like
metal
it?
music.
I actually kind of
I
liked
liked it.
the. Yeah.
I liked it. That's what I'm saying. I liked it because it does encompass a general sense of what a metal band could sing about, especially the more heavy black and the heavy black metal bands.
Mm.
And it was just what was the first what was one of the first lines? I am a terrorist and I kill my
Yeah.
parents. That was probably the first line of the
Is it?
song, and
I
I
thought it
thought,
was "I am a
oh,
terrorist from hell," something
yeah,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, something like that. And I just thought, yeah, you're off to a pretty good start in terms of how metal bands sing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I just listened throughout the whole song, and even yeah, I was pretty captured by the anime opening because it's this metal band singing on stage with the whole crowd in front of them going completely
Mm.
nuts.
Mm.
And well, I guess one thing I've almost never seen metal bands do is have some masochistic individual
Oh, you mean enough
up
metal
there on the
fans.
band. Yeah, up there on the band, getting kicked around and sat on.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of new. Not out of the. not
Yeah,
out of the
it
interest of
depends on,
metal.
on what
Yeah.
type of metal shows you go to, what type of venue.
Mm,
That is a the BDSM and like that sort of movement with the whips and all that. That's something you can go back to even bands like Judas Priest. Rob Halford bought the BDSM gear, the leather jacket, the hat, the whips, all that sort of thing, and that's just even more implemented in this show, and because this show is just a big, massive parody. And it's kind of making fun of metal, but I feel like the author who writes this genuinely likes music and metal.
yeah.
um, I would, if you like Metalocalypse, you'll probably like this show.
Mm,
Metalocalypse humor is a bit more relating to the crazy violentness of metal. This is more the exaggeration of what the fans think of metal musicians and
yeah.
the crazy sexual humor that is in
Yeah.
the metal community
Yeah.
as well, and what they think.
And
Yeah.
I think where the author hits true and where he hits in parody is where he hits in parody is with the manager of the band, who basically, I think first thing we hear from her as she what is it, as she kind of comes in to see the band is, "That was great, the music was fantastic, it really made me wet," and I was just like, holy wow, that's a little over the top.
Yeah.
Okay, but then in terms of where he hits true is with the fans of what was it, Detroit Metal City, um he where the fans all seem to be wearing the same sort of makeup the band wears, clothes, their own actions, how they emulate what the message of the music is. That would hit true. So I think you're right in the case that
Yeah.
the author definitely likes metal because he emulates the
Well,
realistic and the parody part of it.
yeah. So I've always been a big metal fan. Eric, are you familiar with the manga, or did you just read these? Just watch these
Um,
episodes?
I mainly just read I've only sorry watched the anime
Okay.
because unlike you, unfortunately, I wasn't a metal fan until very recently, actually.
Yeah.
Um,
So
I've yeah,
I've
I've
I've yeah, I've read I've got all the issues, and I've been, except for Volume One. That's literally the only volume I don't have. And they're great releases. And yeah, I've been a metal fan since I was 13. I've been into metal and punk music. So there were lots of references, lots of stuff that just, if you're a musician, if you're a fan of this stuff, it's even funnier. Some of the jokes, I mean, some of them can just be funny just because of the context that it's that's set up with the punchline. But if you actually get what they're referencing to, it can be quite funny too. There's even stuff that isn't necessarily jokes, but is quite funny. Jaggy, the bass player, does a lot of he shoots fire out of his mouth and does a lot of crazy fireworks things like that. That was
mm,
something that Ace Frehley of Kiss did quite a bit when he did
mm,
his performances. Obviously, the makeup and the look of the band is taking heavily from Kiss, and also from some black metal bands as well as
mm.
Sweden. But mostly Kiss, especially since the title is Detroit Metal City, which is a parody on the song Detroit Rock City by Kiss. But yeah. But Eric, sorry, you mentioned you've only just recently got into metal.
Yeah, I'd say only a few years ago, which might seem like some time, but essentially, but you've been a fan, definitely a lot longer than I have.
I'd say I'm a little bit less of a metal fan now. I don't keep up with the new stuff as much. I still have bands that
uh,
I go back and listen to.
yeah,
But yeah, I would say I'm not as
yeah,
but I was into it enough to know a lot of what they're referencing. And
yeah,
this is heavily, I would say, centered around a lot of the 80s and 90s metal scene. A lot.
yeah.
So if you know a lot of those bands and a lot of that music, then you're going to get a lot of the stuff they're talking about.
Yeah, no, I was more into. I guess when I first got my taste in music, it was definitely into something like alternative rock, alternative, yeah, the alternative genre. So, um, although I did delve a bit into Linkin Park as well, so I was a big fan of that when I was
Yeah,
younger.
they're a bit
Stuff
more
like,
what we call rap rock sort of
yeah,
thing, less sort of metal.
pretty much, pretty much. I did get into a bit of hip hop and some pop music,
Mm, mm.
which is yeah, which is something I related to in terms of what the main character was striving for when you first get introduced to him, because he never wanted to do metal music in the first
Yeah.
place. He wanted to be a pop star,
He
you
wants to do
know?
a very particular type of pop music, which is
Yeah,
Swedish pop music.
yeah.
And what I like is in the live action of this, he gets a lot of comparisons to sort of the Japanese folk sort of pop
Hmm.
music scene, which is artists like people will know maybe artists like Cornelius and things like that, which are what sort of he plays that acoustic, just vocal kind of
Hmm.
cheesy bubblegum pop type sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, so it was interesting to see just kind of the reaction to the difference in music that he got, because on the one hand he was, yeah, a really big fan of that pop, but because of that metal world he kind of got shoved into, it clashed pretty badly, I guess.
Yeah.
It was made
Actually,
to
we
look a
haven't
bit
mentioned the
funny, but
premise, so I'll just
yeah.
quickly summarize the premise. Basically, this guy moves from sort of the countryside of Japan, moves to the big city. He has hopes of being a pop musician, like a sort of folky pop musician. He ends up somehow winding up in a I'm trying to think of what term I would maybe call speed metal or kind of sort of a hardcore sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe yeah, I've got a couple bands here that would compare him to. I wouldn't call it death metal. It's not quite screamy or gurgly. Yeah, I should know some of the terms here, but I don't. It's not quite. Yeah, it's not quite death metal, but it's close to. It'd be sort of close to hardcore stuff. But he ends up winding up in that band and is really good at it, but wants to leave, but can't. And what I like that's sort of implied in there as well is he he thinks he doesn't like being in this band. He doesn't like the music, but part of him is really good at it, and part of him does actually enjoy, I think, the energy. And I think he does have a bit of a wild side to him that gets to come out through this music.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, it does seem to only come about if he's forced into that situation as well. As with one particular time when he's trying to kind of keep it all in, trying to keep up with his persona of someone who's a bit more gentle, caring, someone who's a type of character who leans more towards that pop music genre. But then there's times when he's forced to take on take on his other persona, the head what is it, head singer and head guitar player for the band.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah,
Krauser the second is the name,
yeah.
I believe.
And one of these situations is in the music store when he's confronted by fans of his own metal music who don't know that he's Krauser, but because he bad mouths Krauser and the music he does, they hear him and they go, "Would you say it again?" And it kind of looks like, oh dear, here comes a fight. But he managed to save himself in that situation by, I guess, um,
Air
I guess,
guitaring the
yeah,
moves and basically showing,
essentially.
almost showing that he kind of is Krauser, but as you without the makeup and stuff, he looks like a completely different person.
Oh, he does.
Yeah.
It's a surprising contrast. You look at Krauser and you think, wow, that guy's wild. He's completely out of control. And then you look at what he actually looks like and you think, who's this potato?
I will say I love this manga and I love this anime, but if dick jokes and some sort of there are some really dark sexual humor. There's a bit of some sort
Mm,
of rapey jokes in there that maybe might offend some people. If that sort of thing does offend you or upsets you, this might not be for you. And there's nothing wrong with if it does, but this might not be for you. But if you can handle a bit of that stuff, then yeah, especially if you're really into metal and you can take a bit of your genre being made fun of a bit at some of the staples of the genre. That yeah, there's definitely some stuff to take in here. I would compare actually the band when I was looking at them. I've got four bands listed here that when I was listening to their opening, that kind of give me an idea of what sort of sound I would classify. I said hardcore before, sort of hardcore, hard metal sort of stuff, speed metal almost. I would the vocals were a very sort of industrial sort of metal, a bit like
Mm,
Rammstein.
yeah.
Sometimes Rammstein doesn't usually do this all the time, but some of the vocals may be a bit deep, bit talky sometimes. With some of these bands, there's a bit of a filter on the vocals, like with this band. There's a bit of a creator sort of sound on the guitar, very heavy, very bass heavy, everything tuned to, I think, drop D. A bit of a Saboteur sort of sound as well with some of the drums. And definitely, I would compare them to a band like Guar as well, if you're familiar with them. They dress up in big costumes and they have a lot of crazy stage performance things. They'll have like someone come on stage and get decapitated and then spray the blood over the audience and do shit like that. And that's sort of what this band sometimes does. There's some great gags making fun of stuff like that and making fun of other genres within metal. And even punk a little bit too gets made fun of. There's a girl band that's sort of playing like the Sex Pistols. I would imagine they'd sound kind of like an L7 type band. And then we've got, even making fun of Japanese genres of music with the Visual K sort of genre that's similar to bands like Nightmare and Bucktick, which has got
Yeah.
that kind of David Bowie poppy rock sort of sound.
No, that definitely does do that. And the whole thing is yeah, it's all completely crazy. And yeah, the way that portrays does seem to portray pretty much everything you just said. Actually, I got nothing else to add. It was a fun first few episodes to watch.
So, would you think of trying the live action or the manga out?
All of it actually.
Because
I'm particularly interested in the live action because I want to see exactly how they emulate the insanity of what Kraus the second performs into real life, which I wouldn't think it would be that hard, especially in this day and age with all the available pyrotechnic technology he could obtain. But I'd still be interested to see what the live action could actually bring
yeah.
and see what that actually does.
So my biggest complaint with the anime adaptation is it looks very cheap. And I don't know if it was just me, but there was an issue with the aspect ratio where it kept on feeling like it was really small and closed in, and then it'd be really wide, and
Yeah,
all these
that was
weird.
that was the same with me too.
Yeah, I didn't like that. And the art isn't always super detailed, and it is a bit ugly, but this just felt even like less detailed than ugly and more
Yeah,
off model than the manga.
yeah, is quite simplistic, which is a surprise considering what the band looks like. The band looks way more detailed than all the characters. That includes the main character when he has his makeup off.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess in terms of emulating who the main cast of the anime, manga, and live action series is, they would, I guess, putting in more effort into the band
Yeah,
would kind
I'd
of
say the music is good. I do like the chorus in the live action a bit more because it's got a bit of a higher chorus than a lower chorus, but that's just me. But I do think the live action and the manga are better ways to approach this series, because it just looked kind of cheap. It took me out a couple times. I couldn't get into it because it just kept on doing weird things with the frame, and the visuals just weren't as detailed as they are in the manga. There's a lot of shots you probably noticed where there'll be a shot, you'll see all the detail of the face and all that, and then all of a sudden they'll do these like they'll do these simplified versions of it, and it's like that's not what they did in the manga. Like there's panels where there's a little bit less detail maybe on some other background characters, but generally there's still a bit of detail on Krauser. He's not completely off model like he is here. It just felt
I
spent a lot of money on the opening and not much else.
I kind of thought that those instances were to maybe create a more comedic image for Krauser, because when Krauser, because I thought they did well when they put detail into Krauser, including his facial features, his playing, his whole atmosphere. That had a lot of detail to it. So. But then when Krauser gets into these situations where it's like, oh no, they're going to reveal my true identity, it becomes more simple, much more comedic. I thought that's what they were going for, which I actually liked, because it's like, okay, if you're in a situation where you might get revealed, a comedic twist to the whole situation might go out quite well. Whereas if you're in your element, if you're basically doing what you're supposed to be doing, every bit of detail counts. So that was kind of my thought on it. I guess another, I don't know, would you call it a trope? But kind of going from a detailed, more serious image to simplistic and comedic worked pretty well for Krauser, especially for a guy who's technically a Swedish pop music lover and someone who seriously does not want to be in this kind of situation.
What are your overall thoughts? Is this would you recommend this to other people? What are your thoughts on it?
I will agree with you on your earlier comment that if you're not into the kind of dark jokes that come.
We'll just say the content can be quite significant and explicit, and if that's
it definitely is quite explicit for all its anime-ish comedic charm. The jokes and the atmosphere can sometimes be quite explicit and may not be for everyone, but for anyone who likes metal music and that whole kind of environment, this might be quite interesting to you. For anyone else who probably won't be able to stomach it, I would avoid it. But for me personally, as someone who only just recently got into metal music, I do like it, since it does emulate quite a bit of what metal bands do, especially ones who are in the black metal and heavy metal and scream metal.
Some of their fans, some of their overreactions and what they might misinterpret. A lot of interesting stuff like that there.
Oh yeah, I think the fans, even in the first few episodes, were a good highlight for the series, because this is kind of what you expect fans to be like, especially the hardcore fans,
And trust me, you go to a couple metal concerts, you'll meet one or two people like this. You'll also just meet people who, if they have a little too much beer in them, they're going to end up like this, or they'll just do some crazy shit. It could be quite interesting.
I mean, as long as you're, at 10 feet away, it can be entertaining. But if you're in arm's reach of them and they start getting violent, you would be a little scared.
Yeah.
But
I would say for anyone going to a hardcore death metal, speed, any sort of genre that's a little bit more intense than a power metal concert, or even at a power metal concert, you do have to have a bit of, you do have to push a bit. You do have to, it's a bit sexist to me saying this, but if you're a younger girl, you're probably going to be fine. But if you're a dude, even if you're, Eric's quite big, so he would be kind of fine. But even a guy like me or Eric, you do get a bit of some people pushing or trying to start a fight, or just people just moving around. The genre is something that some people, used to get out a bit of aggression and just sort of, it can make people feel a certain way. I wouldn't say it makes people violent all the time. It's just, it
No.
sometimes brings out a bit more of a, no one...
It brings in a special crowd who
People
have that
do
energy.
judge. I will say this: people do judge other people. If someone starts viciously beating someone up at a metal concert, other people at that metal concert are not going to take that.
No. No.
Unless they've done something really horrible, like if they've raped someone or something, like right behind you or something. Then yeah, they're probably going to beat the shit out of that person. But if they've just been standing there and they just started a fight because someone said something, there's been a couple, but security break it up, but also the fans, like if in a mosh pit we do pick each other up and things like that. It's not a completely hostile environment. It just can be a bit of an intense environment sometimes, just because the music is very much like that. A good example I would give of this is, as I said before, even power metal concerts can be like this. I went to an Iron Maiden concert, and I sat through the opening band, which was, I believe, one of the guys' sons from Iron Maiden was playing. I didn't really care much for the opening band that much, so I was just standing there waiting for Iron Maiden to start. And three guys who were these three big guys who were maybe 6 foot. I'm 5'9". They were maybe about 6'2" or something. A couple of them were quite, big, broady guys. They really wanted to get to the mosh pit, and the mosh pit was maybe a couple meters away from me. And some of them, one or two of them were trying to get there, and instead of going behind me, they were trying to cut in front of me. And some of them wouldn't move when they cut in front of me, especially one who stood there for, I think, about maybe 5 minutes and then finally moved. But after that guy moved, I just put my foot down, I put my shoulder a bit back, and I just said, nah. And guys, I just sort of pushed back a bit. And it can be risky sometimes. You'll get one or two people who will be a bit angry about that, but you've just got to sometimes do it, I paid for my seat. I'm not freaking moving. I'm going to enjoy watching Iron Maiden. And my biggest thing to anyone going to any concert, I don't care if you're fucking, if you're 6 foot, if you're taller than someone and you can see over them, you don't need to be in front of them. I don't care if you fucking paid for a front seat that's, if everybody's standing, then you can just go to the fuck behind, You don't have to be in front of, I'm 5'9" and I'm taller than some people, but if I saw someone shorter than me who's trying to see, I would let them go in front of me. It's just common courtesy, and it's the only thing that sometimes pisses me off at concerts. But that's another tangent for another time.
Yeah, let's leave it at that. We'll have a complaint session about rock concerts at a later time.
So yeah, that's just an example of what the environment can be like. But generally, I would recommend some people go to concerts. If you're not at this time and place, obviously with COVID, but when this all stops, maybe you could go to an Iron Maiden or Metallica or whatever. Or maybe just check this manga out in the meantime if you're missing the metal scene a bit. But yeah, Eric, any closing thoughts before we go to break?
Honestly, this is a really enjoyable anime to look at, or actually, sorry, series to look at. In terms of whether or not you're new to the metal scene or you've been a long time fan of metal. Obviously, if you can't stomach dark jokes, then you don't have to look at this. But for anyone who does, definitely check it out. It's a really fantastic series to look at, and would definitely be fun to look at, and if you're a fan of all that. So yeah, I liked it, and hope anyone else interested in this kind of thing also looks at it.
All right, we'll be back after the break. we are back from the break. Now we're going to do the manga review. Eric, why don't you tell me what two mangas did you get me and you to read this week?
Well, I got us to read two music-themed mangas. One is called Breman, and the other one is called Sakamachi no Apollo. Hope I'm saying that right. Essentially, two mangas with, I guess, polar opposite music genres. Bremen is a rock and metal themed manga, and Sakamachi no Apollo, I think we'll just call it Apollo for short, is a jazz themed manga.
Yeah.
So Bremen I picked because I like rock and metal, and Apollo I picked because, as Connor has mentioned, either here or to me personally previously, he is a big fan of jazz. He likes jazz.
I just like
he loves it.
I just like music in general, and I'm a musician, as Eric knows. I've been a musician.
Yeah, but if jazz was your favorite,
since I was 10.
if jazz was
No,
blues would be your favorite child.
Blues is my favorite. If I'm going for a favorite, blues is 100% my favorite, followed by sort of shock rock stuff like Alice Cooper. Because Alice Cooper is probably my biggest influence musically. But yeah, you recommended these two titles. What we basically did is I got Eric, as I said, he picked something for me, and I told him to go out and pick something that he hadn't read, and he obviously picked Breman for him and Apollo, and he's read both of these, I would assume, as well. And yeah, he asked me to also read Breman, so I read Breman. So let's start with what did you read, Eric? So you read Breman. Tell us about Breman, and tell us about the premise of it.
So Bremen is essentially a manga that shows the beginning of a particular group of a band. So Bremen is the name of the band, and this band comprises of four individuals. One is Kasuga Romeo, Reiji Hino, Ryo Hayami, and Ran Fuji. So all these four people have gone together to create a band that would help them get to the top of the music world. It is already something we're all familiar with if we have ever seen read any story or seen any documentary of rock and metal bands. It's the dream to get to the top with the music genre you are listening to. So far, the beginning and origin of this band is already crazy and wacky and hilarious. Okay, hijinks and all this trouble they get into.
I think the biggest thing you've left out about this is every single band member in one way or another is either an outcast or a delinquent. And I was going to get to that as well. Involved in some sort of gang violence or as ex part of it. Or I would actually say the biggest thing with this manga, and one of my sort of complaint with it was, because I only read maybe the first couple chapters. I read up to a certain point where they're looking for a new place, and that's about as far as I've read up to. And my biggest complaint has been that it's not really that much about music. It's more about what goes behind the scenes in some of the music scene, but it's mostly about gang violence and fighting and a bit of street fighting and that sort of thing.
But I think I like it because it does emulate some of the beginnings of some known band members. It's not always a matter of a bunch of people who like music all got together and suddenly bam, there we go. There's always trouble in between, and it's not always 3-4 people get together immediately. It's a gradual build up. So I think what I liked about Bremen is that gradual build up. I was expecting what I was expecting going in is that one guy has his dream to create his own band, starts gathering people up, and that was the case with, and I gotta go back because I keep forgetting the names. That was the case with Reiji. He was already he was already what he self-described as a punk rocker, because his own style, the way his hair
He's got a
looks,
mohawk.
basically, yeah, pretty much a what is it, like a Russo mohawk, emulated already his character and what he aspires to be, and basically Romeo, the first one of the first guys to join his band, is already the kind of guy that he wants there, because Romeo seems to emulate a sense of freedom when it comes to, say, rock and metal music. Um, in terms of going back in terms of the beginning of this band, I enjoyed how it began and how they started gathering up their members, because it's not easy to find the right people. Not every band finds the right person, and sometimes, or actually always, bands do have a changeover from people previously, mostly because of personal issues, or outside variants that kind of impede on a certain member's life or how they feel. And so, yeah, essentially, I enjoyed that part where they started gathering together. And I think the gang violence only imparted a small part of the whole band's history and
It has got a bit
kind of
of
the
a
beginning.
shonen tropiness to it, though, where it's like
It
they've
does.
got to go
It
and
really
get new
does.
members of their group by basically getting into like a big fight from the next fight. And I didn't mind that, but
Um,
there was a couple times it's like I want to hear them. Well, I can't physically hear them play because I'm reading it, but I want to see them play so I can get a better idea of how I think they would sound. And there's not many
it's
opportunities
yeah,
where I get to really do that reading it, to be honest.
it it is a slow start. I will tell you that. I've managed to read over 20 chapters, and even though it takes that long for the whole band to get together, they've already started playing by that time, and they've got their own. They've already started on their dream to start getting up on stage and start playing, which is both a good and a bad thing, because um, for other bands, their beginnings aren't always on a stage. I've recently, I have recently kind of looked into, some bands do have some good beginnings. One of my examples would have to be the beginnings of the band Motley Crue. I'm assuming you're familiar with that,
Yeah,
Connor.
yeah, I'm familiar with that band.
Yeah, that's the band itself did begin quite small. I think, as far as I remember, they began in small venues, and struggled even then.
Mm,
But the number they gathered did gradually grow.
mm.
So I think this is almost the case with Bremen. Their beginnings are slow and timely, and there's all these fiascos in between them gathering band members to essentially getting up on stage and singing. So personally, for me, I like the whole beginning and their own how they gathered each other. And even though you're right, down the points that downplayed are gang fights and the sort of shonenish
I didn't hate
tropiness
it.
that
I
comes
was
with it.
just
Oh
waiting
yeah.
for the music to be there.
Oh
It took
yeah.
a long time sometimes for it to be there, and the characters are interesting. I
Mhm.
definitely think this manga was maybe made in the 90s or early 2000s because it's got a lot of themes, hairstyles, and clothing that was very much of that time period.
Oh, definitely.
The biggest thing being the gyaru sort of
Hmm.
fashion and look that isn't quite around, where it's the girls with the tan skin or the blonde hair that's kind of going for that like a ghetto American R&B look that one of the
Mm.
characters who's a transvestite is kind of going for.
Yeah. Yeah, that character is hilarious, actually. And I did really like the way their own character was written, because this is a character that was made to troll the rest of the band. Considering the reactions you get from, especially Romeo, every time this character kind of starts flirting around like a girl, and Romeo's like, "Stop doing this," which I found completely hilarious. But it is. You're right. It does emulate some characteristics of people. Yeah.
I think the community sort of transvestites and stuff in Japan had a different image and stuff, so they have a different reaction, and it's not a common thing. So, and the Gyaro movement is big, but these guys are also from the countryside, so they're not used to what Harajuku's like and places like that, and some of the clubs that exist there as well.
No, definitely. The characters, Romeo and Reiji, there are two guys from suburbia, so their experience with city life was almost next to none. So their trip to the big Tokyo was big Tokyo was essentially an interesting one. Of course, it did help to have someone from there helping them out. So this is where Rio kind of came into play, and I guess meeting Rio was their first taste of what a big city is like. Because when you're in a big city, you're more exposed to
different cultures.
I guess the multiculturalism of the whole situation. With Rio, that's essentially what it emulated. You got two guys from not exactly middle of nowhere, but not exactly a big city life, coming to meet someone who is from the big city, and they get their first taste. So I think their reaction from meeting Rio the first few hours is quite. I think it's not surprising. You do see them have this big shock, which is a big shock reflected to anyone who's never been in a big city before. Especially them kind of, realizing there's people there like Rio. There's people there that think like Rio. There's special people like Rio. This is insane, but it's still really cool. I think.
Sorry. Finish your point, Eric.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, you finish first.
I already forgot what I was going to say.
Okay. All right. So to contrast that, I was just going to say, because I know Eric has to go soon. So just to contrast the time period and what we were just talking about, the manga that Eric got me to read, Apollo, interestingly enough, this manga does the exact opposite thing, where it's a guy from the city coming into the countryside and having to deal with things being slower and different, people being more like family, and people being more close-knit, and secrets getting around a lot faster, a different sort of vibe, and this is set in the 60s in Japan as well, so it's a very different time period. It's very I thought the time period for this was very interesting. I thought the characters were interesting. I figured there are very few manga where I've seen two main characters that are Christian. So that was an interesting dynamic. One of the main characters, Sentaro, well, it's kind of a spoiler, so I'm going to say spoiler here, but it's kind of obvious. He is a what Japanese would call a hafu. He's half Japanese, I believe, half American. And he's kind of outcast at school. He gets into fights. He's a bit of a brawler, and because of this, he also. What I liked is you can see why he's a Christian in some ways, because he needs somewhere. Some of the stuff in his life can't necessarily be good role models or good places where he can relax, where he can go and he can have some quiet time, but the church for him is that place. So I thought that was a very interesting dynamic for that character. And then you have Kaoru, who's the complete opposite of Sentaro, but he's a very interesting character in his own right. He's seems a bit snobbish. As I said, he's a city guy that's came into this country place, and he has his own dramas with some of his family, with some class issues with his parents, and there's also a bit of a love triangle between him and this girl, and his a bit of a rivalry in the friendship and stuff, and that was probably the backstories and the relationships were all the things I really liked about this, and then bonding through music was interesting. But I do have some things to say about the music, but I'll let Eric just talk about his overall thoughts on this manga.
I did like it, although I guess I guess one of the things that I've kind of looked into this, trying to go in, is understand exactly what how is jazz emulated in a manga like this, because I have almost never read any kind of jazz read any mangas with jazz as a music theme. You might have introduced me to one called Blue Planet.
Called Blue something, and it's got a saxophone player. It's really good. I wish there'd be more of it coming out.
Definitely, and that was one of the first and only jazz type mangas or closest to a jazz type manga I have read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was great. But looking at Apollo, I was kind of expecting the same thing, kind of going into a manga where I could understand a little bit more about jazz from, a different type of media.
Eric, I just want to cut you there. Blue Giant, I believe, is
what Blue Giant
is called.
That's right, Blue Giant.
Yeah. So continue.
Yeah. And looking at it, it gave me a little bit of understanding, but I think in terms of how jazz is supposed to be emulated in this is more into how it integrated into the lives of some of these people, where jazz was used as a focal point for how, their lives intermingled, how people thought of each other, how that type of music brought them close together.
Well,
and
it also reflects their personalities as well.
Yeah.
What I liked about it is Sentaro's kind of a rough around the edges guy, and drumming is his, I think, his who he is. It's a lot of his personality shows through his drumming. Same with our main character Kaoru. His biggest problem when he first starts playing jazz is he's very stiff. He's very rigid, and that comes from his classical background, but also a lot of his personality where he has a bit of trouble relaxing and just taking it easy, which is a huge part of jazz, just going with the swing and going with the flow of things.
Yeah, I think that was the interesting part about it, because even though it wasn't kind of fully explored, one or two chapters of it kind of showed did kind of show that big difference between how classical music is played versus how jazz is played, especially on the piano. And that, I guess, if you would agree with this, Connor, that kind of slight hand movement, slight twitching of the fingers, kind of how much pressure you put on the keys, made the difference between classical music and jazz.
Yeah, so jazz is very much going with the flow. A lot of people have differing opinions on jazz. There are some very rigid, very almost classical mindsets in jazz from some people. But my favorite type of jazz is where it's, we're going to play this song, but we're not going to play it exactly the way it's been played. We are going to just halfway through have a bit of a muck around section where we just sort of, we're just jamming around and just tossing and turning and flipping ideas and going, okay, you're going to, do 3 or 4 chords here. I'm going to, do a couple hits here, that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. There is a bit of freedom to how jazz is played in this manga.
The biggest difference between probably jazz and and say like an improv sort of rock, what we consider with that is jazz is taking a lot of some of the complexities that you know, or some bigger, taking even some smaller chords and just different timings and flows with another person. That's a lot to me of what jazz is.
Yeah, and I think it kind of helped. I think it kind of helped with all this improvisation, um, to help develop the main character and Sentara as well. Because um, because if you just, I think if they kind of just tried to straight up play jazz and the main character continued to struggle, there might not be that much development and there'll always be roadblocks. But because of the improvisation, I think it made it much easier for the main character to kind of integrate.
There is some struggle with at least one of the characters, because I do hate reading some of these manga, and this does have some of that issue, which I'll get into. I don't like the manga where the person is just a prodigy from the start and we don't really get to see where they got from or see them sort of develop or grow much as a musician. I think that's kind of unreal. One of my biggest criticisms actually with Blue Giant, which I like a lot. I don't like that everybody just thinks he's got an amazing sound and he's instantly amazing. I like that in one part of that manga there is someone who goes, you're good at this, but you've got this problem and this problem and this problem, and you need to do this, and they get into a lot of the technical things, because while I wouldn't say jazz should be rigid, jazz does have the thing of you are taking what you know you're the best at, and essentially, you're playing around within this genre and trying out different things, and you do occasionally make mistakes, but it's not the same as say punk or rock where you're doing that, where the mistakes are kind of a bit of part of the music. Here it's different, and also it's a lot about if someone does suddenly do a key change by accident, well, the whole band has to do a key change now by accident. It's a lot of the improv rule of acting and reacting, working off what someone else lays down.
Oh, definitely. And that is something that kind of helps the main character play along with everyone else there. And as you mentioned before, the main character might seem like it, but he's not a prodigy. He's not some genius. He comes from a well-off family who, as apparently with most Japanese families,
he's a little too, like I said, he's a little too rigid. He's a little too, he's a little bit shy as a musician, and he's not really been himself very much as a musician.
Yeah. But I mean, but obviously with but with him getting introduced to jazz, that actually helped develop his character and develop his his interest in music a bit more. Because going from one type of music, classical, to another, jazz, it does seem to have kind of brought him out of his shell, so to speak. Where you kind of see, instead of being this kind of rigid person, he is someone with feelings. He's a human being who's made mistakes. He's someone who has his own happy moments, his sad, his angry, his despair moments. And I think that's how jazz kind of brings these characters together, by kind of forcing them to really see themselves in a different sort of light,
Music, especially jazz, is a conversation in itself. And what I like is, this is kind of realistic to the way some of me and my friends are who are musicians. You might have an argument, you might have a disagreement on something, or you might not be talking about something, or you might just be... You might have not talked for a while, and it might have not been an argument, you just might not have been talking a while in general, and then you play music and you feel like you've had a big discussion with someone, or you've went over something with someone through the music, and that's how some of these characters can develop. We see that with these characters where they might have a big problem, or they might have had a rough day, or they might have even just had a good day, but they get to express something they may be holding back or something they've been thinking about through the music, and they get to sort of come together and bond for it.
Yeah, it's these and yeah, Polo does have these interludes where they get to play together the different music and yeah, these interludes is kind of I guess looking at it, the interludes where they do play the music is kind of like a conclusion to either a story or a situation or argument. You know, they've, as you said before, whether they're just trying to fix a problem, have an argument, or try to discuss something. It kind of starts like that. Then they find how the situation can be fixed. They develop from that, and at the end of it, it all comes together, and they kind of, I guess, in a way, sing about it. Or the interludes of music is, I guess, the conclusion to a previous problem, which I actually did like seeing. Although sometimes, even after that, the problem still continues to persist. But then, what could they do about it? Some of the problems the characters do deal with, like relationship problems, are always going to exist and in some way fester. But so far reading the manga, it doesn't seem to be affecting them too negatively. It seems to be flowing. It seems to have, some fixes here and there. But I feel like if I do continue reading this, I would see the relationships and the dynamics between this group and everyone around them change quite drastically.
I feel like if they had more live gigs, they would actually be under a lot more pressure as musicians and would be having some of that contention. But since that's not the case, those issues don't come about. Just to quickly, I wanted to. This is going to be maybe a bit controversial for some people because I know this is actually it's gotten more attention over the years. It's actually a reasonably well-known title, but I let Eric give me the manga because not many people have read the manga, I think, but a lot of people have seen the anime of this. And I went and checked out 1 or 2 episodes of the anime and some clips online of it, and I do have some problems with some of the music, which I thought from reading it I didn't think I would have any issues. Because it's kind of hard to tell, but knowing these jazz songs that I do that they're covering, I just assumed they were either going to sound like them or sound like kind of a take on them. When I listened to the interpretations that they did for the anime, the piano for me, I thought sounded fine. There's a lot of good work done on the piano. There's one Coltrane song, Some of My Favorite Things, which is also, as we know, from The Sound of Music, but was famously covered on one of John Coltrane's albums. There's a really good, there's some really good piano work in there that's just sort of not in the version that they're doing. The bass section on the piano needs to be a bit more, especially on the left side. It's just not quite there when you hear the piece, and it feels a little bit empty, especially since they don't have another bass player or another musician. This is a scene I'm talking about where they play this and it's just a drummer and a piano, and when you have that sort of thing going on, you need to have another bass line or something going on to fill in some of the space and the gap that's going to be in there musically. So that was something that what I would critique a little bit, but generally the piano was not my biggest problem with the music. My biggest problem was actually Sentaro on the drums. Hearing him in the anime actually gave me a completely different impression of his character and made me think that he would actually be better off as a rock drummer, because his biggest problem is he rushes a lot on his drumming and he is a little out of time and places, and jazz drumming can go into some weird timing, can do some weird fills and things like that. But generally, the thing with jazz drumming is your drummer might do some soloing, might do some weird tom work, might go really intense on a couple bits of the drums, but then he's straight back into the timing of the song. And there's a lot of really great, especially from some of the artists they're covering, like Coltrane and such. And Blackie. There's some really good hi-hat work that just isn't there, which was quite disappointing. Hi-hat, for me as a musician, I can tell how good a jazz drummer is by how long they can do their hi-hat work, how long they can keep on tapping the hi-hat for, because as a jazz drummer, that's the biggest thing you're going to have to do. You're going to have to do that, just constantly hitting that hi-hat over and over and over again. And I've seen musicians, just pushing and pushing till their hands bleed, or just pushing and pushing till their hands are going numb. And I don't quite see that with Sentaro. There's also a mix issue as well, where there's a little too much floor tom in the general mix of the drums that I thought was a little bit weird. But yeah, the drumming for me, I just thought it's got some jazz flair in it, but it feels very rushed, which can be, especially for some of the pieces they played, just didn't seem to work for me, just personally. I've played with some really gifted drummers, especially I play with a guy who's metal jazz salsa sort of influenced drummer, bossa nova sort of style as well, and he can get quite aggressive and fast, but when he's playing jazz, he's really relying on that hi-hat work, and when he needs to get fast and do some hard hits, he knows to sort of keep with the style though still, and know when to come back to the timing and back to where it needs to be, which I just didn't think was there in this, to be honest.
Yeah, I'll definitely take your word for it, as I haven't actually watched the anime, so I can't really make a critique judgment on Sentaro's
It was just
style
something
of
that I
drumming.
noticed and bothered me
Yeah,
a little bit.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, in terms of, you wouldn't see that in the manga, as the atmosphere, as the drawn atmosphere does make it look like he's in tangent with everybody else's music, with the piano playing, the trumpeteering, the even the singing,
Double bass
basically.
as well.
Yeah, and the bass as well. So you wouldn't kind of expect them to be out of the loop of anything. And he himself has done a couple of chapters, a critique of the main character's rigid style of playing on the piano. So you would think he'd know quite a bit about how how jazz works on different instruments, especially the drum.
I I
But
personally I
yeah,
personally think my biggest issue with the drumming and the piano and things like that, and as I said, these are beginner musicians sort of too. Sentaro has been playing a long time, but he could be considered a young beginner sort of musician. I do have a problem with him drumming like that and it not being criticized, or at least being pointed out. I know plenty of jazz musicians that would point it out or would say, hey, you're rushing. And that would be something interesting to do with the character dynamic and to do with the story, but it's just not touched upon. And they kind of do this bad thing
mm,
that I see in some music manga where it's just like, oh no, you're amazing and you're just playing really well. And it's like, well, no, he's actually, and you could point these
mm.
out and, do things with it, but, you know.
I think where I'm up to in reading Apollo is that that kind of drumming style of Centauros is going to be reach it is seem to be reaching a breaking point, in that he might need to either make a choice to change something about his drumming style or take a new direction already.
I think he has a
I
lot
haven't
of
seen how this
potential. I,
developed
I
yet,
just
but
think he rushes too much,
yeah.
which is a
Mm.
time he maybe needs a metronome, some practice or something, which would be good. It'd be good to see
But
some realistic,
yeah.
practice and training.
Yeah. But I think in the manga, someone's already noticed that, and they're going to be looking to do something about that. So I'm not going to spoil any more about it,
Yeah.
but that kind of development, I think, already has started. So I'm going to keep reading and see what actually that develops into, because that's an
So
already interesting direction to see it go in. But
yeah,
um, yeah, I'll definitely keep reading to see how that ends up.
yeah.
how that ends,
wrap
and
this up,
see.
what's our final thoughts on both of these manga? And I'll let you start first, Eric.
Well, considering the long and in-depth conversation we had about Apollo, I think Apollo might be the favorite one of the two. Breman does emulate a almost generic overview of how rock and metal bands could start and how they play, and all that concept of freedom to play as you want, to be how you want, to be together with a group of people who with a dream to reach the top. That was my favorite part about it in the beginning of this band, because without having to make massively long dialogues or over extend their developments, these people have a dream already, okay, to reach to that top, to see, in their own words, a massive crowd of people watching them play and just kind of playing the way they want, which I think reflects on real world concepts of rock and how people view it, and even how some bands started, like say Motley Crue. Because that's why I kind of wanted to mention Motley Crue, because quite a few things about Bremen reflected to how Motley Crue started, and that's something I really liked about it. But in terms of looking at Apollo's definitely much quieter, much more restrictive, but its development, but the character development and the relationships and the dynamics between all the currently introduced characters is actually more interesting than Bremen's. So I guess in that sort of scenario, I definitely enjoyed Apollo more than Bremen, which is hilarious since I recommended that to you. But since I knew you'd know more about jazz than I do, I figured let's push that on to Connor, and he'll be able to give a much more in-depth, in-depth view of this style of music than I can.
So I thought both of these were interesting picks. I really got into just the characters and the story of Apollo. But for me, with both of these, I would like to see maybe some more realistic music training and music development. I mean, I know if they're rock musicians, so we don't necessarily have to see them do scales all the time and practice. But it would be nice to see them sitting down, trying to write lyrics. It would be nice to see them play a gig and have technical issues rather than just people starting to fight issues. Just other different things that could be done that would be really interesting. But overall, I thought both mangas were an interesting read. I'll continue reading both of them, and I'm going to just try and honestly finish them off, because both of them have interested me enough where I want to see where they're going. I think Bremen might, depending on where it goes, it could possibly lose me if it doesn't have a bit more of a character arc of some of the characters, and goes a bit more into the music side of things. But I could definitely see myself finishing Apollo. But yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely try and finish it and see how that works out. I'm also going to keep looking into Bremen as well and see whether or not there's any sort of, I guess, development occurring with the characters beyond the, beyond all the gang fights and all the crazy crap that happens. So yeah, that's what I'll be hoping to expect from reading it.
All right, this has been Alternating Sloth Podcast, episode 11. Catch you later.
See ya.